Time to get out to the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. Welcome in our guest, Ben Standig. Ben, what are your plans for tomorrow? Obviously got a football game. Are you going to be able to do anything fun outside of the football game tomorrow?
I hope Ben Standig is sitting down. Wink, wink. Get it?
Yeah, that was terrible. But no, I mean the game will be the day, and I guess I'll get home in time to watch the third game. Should I be inclined? Even though that's another one where at least that one has some importance because Denver's still playing for things. But yeah, that's it's just a work day and then chilling out for a little bit.
Did you get the cat something?
Say it again.
Did you get the cat something for Christmas?
Oh, it's every day. It's Christmas for
spoiled cat.
You know.
There we
go. Yeah, there you go.
Ben, I want to start by asking you, we've been talking about this quarterback situation. I'm curious your thoughts just in general. Do you think this is something that, I mean, we were having the discussion the first hour, and halfway through the discussion, I was like, perspective on what we're talking about right now versus last year just kind of slaps you in the face that we're talking about QB3, QB4, QB signed off the street, and whether it matters or not. What do you make of the whole situation and how it's been handled?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, to your point, this is, at the bottom of the list of things that matter in a season that's unfortunately gone as wrong as this one has. I do think the one piece of this to me that is notable is that, like, everybody's obviously a little bit miffed as to why you have a young guy in Sam Hartman that you're not going to play after he's been here for 2 years. And then, especially when the other option essentially is Josh Johnson, a 39-year-old who is not going to be part of any logical future. And I think for me, the issue is here, we get to who the top two quarterbacks were, and they're pretty good in that space when healthy. But it's the most important position, and I'm always a believer that you should draft a quarterback almost every year or at least find some ways to, continue to build up that depth, that pipeline. And you look at a team like the Eagles, and they have done a lot of that over the last 2 or 3 years, where they've cycled through your Kenny Pickett's, your Dorian Thompson Robinsons, your Tanner McKees, your Kyle McCords, Sam Howell. None of them may work, but they are constant attempts to try to find another young person to fill in. And here we have Washington with Marcus Mariota is a free agent at the end of the year. It's no lock he comes back, and yet there is no obvious succession plan, even though they have 2 roster spots filled with quarterbacks. So to me, that's like sort of the bigger issue. It's not the biggest deal in the world by any stretch compared to all the other issues. But to me, it is sort of like, wait, why didn't you do a better job of trying to, again, the most important position, try to always upgrade there and try to always find more? And does that translate to other parts of the roster? And I think in a year where they had the oldest roster in the league, or the last few weeks, once they knew they were out of it, they still didn't really sort of churn the practice squad for any attempt at anything. And to me, that's always a good sign for a healthy organization. And, it is just notable that they didn't do that. But again, relatively speaking to the bigger picture, it's not that big of a deal.
See that, Ben, you went down the road that I wanted to go with this. I constantly hear from Dan Quinn and Adam Peters that there's constantly day in and day out finding ways to get better. How many guys did we claim off of people's practice squad this year? How many times did we flip our own practice squad around this year? For a team that's been as injured as Washington has, it feels like they've sat on their hands a lot and just gone with the flow, so to speak. And when they signed Sam Hartman last summer, he was signed to one of the richer UDFA deals, not just for the quarterback position, but of all the UDFAs. And you would assume that their long-term plan for him is to eventually become Jayden Daniels' backup. Well, the clock's running out on that. And you want to see what the guy has. I don't know. It feels like something that we're kind of spending too much time on. But I think the bigger picture point is what you said. Like, I want to see them be more aggressive in trying to add talent.
Yeah. I mean, look, I kind of feel the same. This was a weird year, of course, because with so many injuries, there were some weeks where they were just trying to, have enough bodies on a given day. And then, they felt at times, signing guys like a Robbie Chosen or, some other older vets to come in was the quickest fix they could do versus taking a flyer on a younger guy. And I accept that for sure. But like post-bye, I guess I'm kind of like, all right, well, why not now try some of that. And again, look, I'm not pretending, and I don't think you are either, that any of this is to say, oh, they're going to find some all-pro off of somebody else's practice squad. It is just to say you should always be looking, and especially when you have the oldest roster in the league, when you have all the number of free agents they're going to have at the end of the season. Like, look, they did bring in Traylon Burks, they did bring in Drake Jackson. These are two guys who were recent high draft picks coming off of injuries. That's exactly what we're talking about. But those are sort of more obvious ones. What about where's your scouting department on the random, practice squad guy? Like last year here, Mitchell Tinsley and Bryson Tremaine were on the practice squad here. They've now gone to Cincinnati and Carolina respectively. Again, not remotely suggesting they've become starters, but they're depth pieces. They're on the roster. They're young guys who have some upside. To me, that's all I'm talking about.
Yep.
Take shots on players who might be able to do something. Odds are they probably won't, but we already know that some of these guys have no long-term future here. Like Chris Moore, for example, seems like a good guy, seems like he was a good teammate, seems like he knew exactly what he needed to do on the field, except that, we saw the results. It's not going to be somebody you would be relying on next year. So why keep bringing him back versus bringing in some other receiver, especially, again, when the season is where it is right now? It's not like if they were still in the mix, that's different, but they're not. So that's where it's like, I don't know. Well, why not try to find something else?
Talking with Ben Standig here on the Rude Guest Hotline. Check out his Substack, Last Man Standig. Guy that's going to be starting at left tackle tomorrow, Brandon Coleman. What is his future with this team? Because I think he can still play. They clearly went with Chris Paul after a couple weeks with guard, and I guess they don't feel like he can play there as effectively. But every time I've seen him on the field this season, I haven't looked out there and said, oh, he's terrible and just can't get on the field. But where exactly is his future if you're going to sign Laremy Tunsil and Connerly's going to play right tackle? What does his future look like here?
Yeah, it still may be at guard. I just think that they decided that Chris Paul was – they wanted to give Chris Paul a chance. I think, Coleman had been dealing with injuries since he's been here to some degree, and I think there was a notion of, hey, there's – you got to maybe learn how to play through some pain versus, being actually – injured, and obviously his performance also just wasn't that great the first couple of weeks. And Chris Paul came in and, I think surprised a lot of us by playing as well as he had. Now, that said, Chris Paul's a free agent, and it's easy for us to say, okay, we'll sign him. Well, we'll see. We don't know what the market's going to be for a young starting guard, right? I mean, all of a sudden, Chris Paul to the rest of the league may look very different than the way we've looked at him for most of the last 4 years. So is Chris Paul definitively back? I don't know. I mean, you do have Brandon Coleman, who, again, I think I agree that, like, when he's played over the last few weeks, when he's had to sub in, he's looked, pretty good. Or he's looked, you get back to why you were intrigued in him as this huge guy who can move in the first place. So if they think, hey, he can do more, Dan Quinn said the other day that what he does at tackle, since it's on the same side, should be easily to translate to the other position, to the inside spot. So this could very well be Coleman auditioning essentially to be, if not the plan at left guard, or at least to be they feel good about their backup plan if Chris Paul moves on. So I do think there's still plenty here for him with regards to this team, but whether Chris Paul comes back will obviously play a huge role in whether Coleman starts or not.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Cliff gave him a ringing endorsement at the podium, saying he thinks he could be a high-end starter at both tackle and guard. It's fascinating what ends up happening with him. I think he's a good football player, but wasn't it like, Ben, 17 consecutive days of practice missed during camp this year? Like, he's had his issues when it comes to staying healthy, and I heard the same thing that you heard in terms of wanting him to gut some of these things out a little bit better, and obviously he kind of missed his mark on that. Looking big picture at this thing, when it comes to the offensive line, period, I can't help knowing how the negotiation went this past summer with Terry, Ben. I'm not wishing for it, obviously, because you don't want that to get messy, but, like, you think there's any shot that they try to play hardball with Laremy Tunsil in his representation? Because I would have to imagine, Ben, and I don't know, but based off the pedigree and where the market is at tackle and how well he's played, he would have every right to walk into that office and demand to be the highest paid tackle of all time. Are they willing to do that in your mind?
Well, I think my answer would probably be yes. I mean, I don't know necessarily if they're going to, if it's truly he wants to be the highest paid and they have to do it. But yeah, I think they'll get something done. Now, was I optimistic that they would get something done with Terry last year much sooner? I was. In this case, though, I'm not saying that they weren't fans of McLaurin, but they didn't draft him, right? He was inherited. This guy in Tunsil, they made a big trade for him to not get this done, having given up draft picks into 2 draft picks that are going
Yeah.
to be a second and a fourth that are coming due this year. I think it would just be a bad look. But also, he played well. The whole point is to benefit your quarterback and the offense in general, but the quarterback specifically. So I imagine they get this done. Now, Tunsil is his own agent, so that can always get a little bit tricky.
Oh, really? That's a hell of a nugget, Ben. Why, I did not know that.
Yeah. So obviously, Terry McLaurin had an agent, and that went the way that went. But so it can kind of go, in either way. You don't have that buffer to talk to somebody similar with Bobby Wagner. So, Tunsil said very early on, he made it clear to the team what he was looking for, and I imagine they'll get something done. And I would if you made me guess, I would guess with much less stress than the McLaurin deal, in part because, like I said, this group traded for him, and I'm sure they want to see this thing through. Plus, they have the space, and he played very well.
Talking with Ben Standig on Grant and Danny, Toby Altizer, Lynnell Willingham sitting in for the guys on Christmas Eve. Defensively, going into next year, what do you think happens at that D coordinator position? Do you think DQ, obviously probably going to bring somebody else in, but is that guy going to call the plays? Is DQ going to keep in charge of the defense? What do you think ultimately happens there?
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would guess Dan Quinn does not call the plays, but I think the question is, does he bring somebody else in? And there's a lot of Dan Quinn acolytes out there who've been with him at other stops who could come in and be a defensive coordinator and continue to run that scheme. That to me is the question. Is that what he wants to do? Or is he willing to say, you know what, maybe we need to do something different, that it's not just who's calling the plays, but maybe it's, we need to try a little bit something else. Everybody's talked about how this defense has struggled, or Dan Quinn defense has struggled against Shanahan offenses and things like that. So that to me is more of the question, that rather than say, is Dan Quinn going to call the plays? And, look, there'll be a bunch of candidates. Some of them will become a little more obvious as we go into the playoffs here. And you see which teams, have defenses that stand out and, all those types of deals. So that to me is the question, does Dan Quinn change up the scheme or not? I don't have a great feel for it. A lot of coaches struggle to change what they know, what they've done their whole career. If he went to be a defensive coordinator for another team tomorrow, that's not happening. I'm just saying, but hypothetically, if he did, I don't imagine he's going to completely upend his system. He probably would go and say, yeah, this is what I do, and this works. So to be willing to change that is not easy for everybody, and I don't know where he's at on that. But that's the question to ask: is what system is Dan Quinn going to run next year?
Well, and so off of that, do you think that he might be, with how it went with Joe Witt, do you think he might be a little more hesitant to go with someone that's going to be stepping into that role for the first time, or does he want a veteran D coordinator that might have experience calling plays before?
No, it's a good question. Obviously Dan Quinn, there was the defense just seemed a little bit more functional and cohesive since he's been taking over. So is that because he's doing a better job of calling plays than Joe Witt did? I mean, Quinn was involved with the game planning all along, and we're really just saying, okay, it's third down and long. Does he calling a play that somebody else that Joe Witt wasn't calling? That's the part that's a bit unclear, but that's part of the autopsy they're going to have on this whole season, was where exactly did things go wrong. And again, it's also going to be a factor with who comes back. The offense, I don't think is assuming everybody's healthy. They need some more speed, another receiver, but it doesn't. We'll see what they do at tight end, but they're not too far away from having a group that could be, replicate what they did last year. The defense, though, there's going to be significant turnover, you would think, and therefore, what type of players are you bringing in, and how does that factor into all of this? Are you bringing in a bunch of kids that maybe you do want more of an experienced hand calling plays? If it's another veteran laden group, then maybe you don't worry about it as much, despite Joe Witt's struggles this year. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question for sure as to what he's going to look for.
Ben, there's something that I got to go back and look at my notes. I think it was like November the 12th is when I first brought this to the airwaves, and I feel like I haven't gotten the answer I guess I've been looking for. When you go on Commanders.com and you flip through their scouting department, you've covered this league for a while. How common is it for a new general manager to inherit the previous regime's scouts and then not get rid of them after the first draft? Because the dudes that are here scouting for Adam Peters have been here for some time, and the director of college scouting, Tim Gribble's been in that role since 2020, and we know what the draft histories look like.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and something I've wondered a little bit as well. Typically right after the first, you kind of keep everybody in place because they know all the state secrets, so to speak, for the first draft, and then after that is when you start to make changes, and they have largely stayed with a lot of the guys that were here previously. I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Because can you blame, if we're going to go back to the Ron Rivera, Marty Herney times, were they listening to the scouts, or were they making the decisions? Were the scouts saying take Forbes over Christian Gonzalez, or did they decide that's what we need to do, right? So it's things like that and I can't say I know the answer. And same thing here, did the scouts say, hey, we think Ben Sinnott makes good sense in the second round, or did Adam Peters, who compared Sinnott to sort of a Kyle Juszczyk, George Kittle combo from two guys he had in San Francisco, is he putting his thumb on the scale? I would kind of imagine the answer is yes. So, it is an interesting.
But Ben, isn't he?
Sure.
Isn't not to cut you off? Isn't, and I'm just trying to get familiar with the process, the way that I think it works. Like Adam Peters isn't on the road, 9 months out of the year the way that these scouts are. So their job is to put together these reports. And if they're not bringing him back quality reports, then how fair is it to even blame Adam?
Well, ultimately, you're right. Ultimately, the buck stops with him. I don't know. It's again, you don't know for sure. Look, the Corey Krosky-Merritt, who the heck was he? And they drafted him in the seventh round. So far, that looks like it's a reasonable call. They all were on board. Jordan McGee was their Commander Caucus pick last year. They all decided this is the guy. We obviously have not seen enough from him, but I think we have seen enough to think that there's something intriguing there. So, look, it's all you're right. The scouts are essentially doing the grunt work, and then the information is presented to the guys at the top. But, Peters has been looking at this for months, if not years, whereas, say, Dan Quinn and the coaching staff will only be catching up in the short term once the season's over, and they're the ones who are really, really going to be reliant on scouts. There's hundreds of players, we get that, but Peters has had plenty of time to review whatever he's wanted to, or go on the road if he's wanted to, or do whatever. So, yes, the scouts will bring him information, but, that's his job with Lance Newmark and some of the other execs to sift through it. So you can point to the scouts for sure, but ultimately, the front office has plenty of time to look through whatever they want to look through.
Ben, appreciate the time today. Hopefully you can have a good Christmas despite whatever happens at Northwest Stadium tomorrow.
Thanks, Ben.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
There's Ben Standig. He joined us on the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. Coming up next.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
The chat, they won't stop. First of all, tremendous sweater.
Thank you.
They're saying I look like the Grinch. They're saying I don't have any type of holiday spirit. I'm a company man. Well, I guess I can't even show my shirt because they're no longer an affiliate of the company. But easy on me, guys. I'm working to get in the Christmas.
Well, it doesn't help that I'm the most Christmassy guy here. I've worn a holiday sweater almost the entire month. Wear a Santa hat when I'm not. I'm just happen to be wearing both today.
Well,
it is Christmas Eve.